I sent my ex an email to win the breakup. Now I'm performing an autopsy on my own life. The silence in my apartment is a physical presence, it's not peaceful. It's the thick, sterile quiet of a vacuum-sealed container, and I'm the specimen trapped inside. The only sounds are the low, mournful hum of the refrigerator and the distant siren wailing its way down a street I can no longer see from my window. I'm performing an autopsy, you see, on my own life. I am both the coroner and the corpse, sifting through the wreckage with the cold detachment of a professional. My phone, lying face up on the coffee table, is the primary piece of evidence. My thumb unlocks it out of sheer muscle memory, a twitchy, desperate habit. The group chat, the usual suspects, once a relentless stream of notifications, is a digital graveyard. My last message from 2 days ago, a pathetic attempt at a joke, sits there unread by half the members, ignored by the rest. It's a monument to my own social leprosy. An hour ago, I texted Jessica, my supposed best friend, asking if she was free to talk. The reply, which came after 37 agonizing minutes, was a single brutal letter. It wasn't just a letter, it was a verdict. And all of this social flatlining, can be traced back to a single point of origin. A digital time bomb I built myself, armed with pride, and mailed directly to my ex, Knox, 2 weeks ago. I thought it was my victory lap, the final, brilliant move that would prove I had won the breakup. I didn't realize I was just signing the official death certificate for a life I didn't even know I wanted to keep. Let's rewind. The scalpel of memory cuts back 2 weeks to the moment of impact. The silence hadn't descended yet, my apartment was buzzing, humming with the frantic energy of a war room. The enemy wasn't Knox, not really. It was the narrative. It was the specter of his perceived pity, his quiet, dignified exit from my life that I couldn't stomach. And my weapon of choice, my nuclear option, was an email. My motivation, now laid bare on the autopsy table, was a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and the pathological competitiveness that had propelled me to senior vice president by 30. Knox hadn't just broken up with me, he had rejected the entire brand I had so meticulously curated for us, for myself. In my world, you don't get left. You leverage a better offer. The thought of him picturing me alone, curled up in our old apartment, was an unbearable stain on my personal track record. I had to win. I had to reframe the entire breakup not as a failure, but as my strategic pivot to a superior product. So I wrote. For 3 hours, I was a master propagandist. Every sentence was a carefully polished little dart, dipped in the poison of feigned indifference. The subject line itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Hope you're well, not thinking of you, too weak, not we need to talk, too desperate, but the cool, detached sign-off of a business acquaintance. I opened with a breezy, condescending check-in, asking how his little workshop was doing, a deliberate jab at the furniture restoration business he loved more than anything. I painted a picture of my own life as a whirlwind of success and excitement since he'd been gone. Then came the payload. I introduced Oliver. He wasn't entirely fake. I had been on one painfully mediocre coffee date with a consultant from a rival firm named Oliver, but in my email he was transformed. I sculpted him from my own ambition. He became a titan of industry, a paragon of sophistication who flew business class and quoted financial reports. I wrote in excruciating detail about our incredible dinner at Lucille. That Michelin-starred place, Knox always said, was a monument to insecure people with too much money. I described how Oliver just got the pressures of my job, how we'd spent hours mapping out Q4 strategies over a bottle of wine that cost more than Knox's favorite workbench. It was all a lie, of course. The real Oliver had talked about his ex-wife for 45 minutes and then tried to split the bill for 2 lattes. The kill shot was a single, devastating sentence I rewrote a dozen times for maximum impact. It's just so refreshing to be with someone who sees my ambition as a strength, not a threat. I let that hang there, the unspoken accusation that he was the threat, that he was the one holding me back. I read the email aloud to the empty room, my heart pounding with a sick, thrilling power. This wasn't a message, it was a press release announcing his obsolescence. My finger hovered over the send button. For a split second, a tiny, sane voice, the last remnant of the woman Knox had loved, whispered that this was a terrible, irreversible mistake. That it was cruel and beneath me. I crushed that voice with the heel of my ambition. I clicked. And for about 10 glorious, shimmering minutes, the relief was intoxicating. It was a chemical rush, a pure hit of victory that flooded my system and numbed the gaping wound of his absence. I had landed the final blow. I had won. I leaned back in my chair, the architect of my own magnificent comeback, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just detonated a bomb in the foundations of my own life. To understand the blast radius, you have to understand what was destroyed. You have to dissect the relationship itself, peel back the layers of curated photos and witty captions to get to the tissue and bone. Knox and I were a study in contrasts, an odd pairing that worked with a kind of magnetic friction until it didn't. He was a man made of solid, tangible things. Reclaimed oak, hand-forged steel, the smell of wood varnish and turpentine. He was a furniture restorer, a craftsman. His world was quiet, focused, and governed by principles as unyielding as the grain in a piece of centuries-old mahogany. Honesty wasn't a policy for him, it was a physical law like gravity. A joint had to be true, a finish had to be authentic. Anything less in his mind was a structural flaw, a lie. I, on the other hand, lived and breathed the intangible. As a senior VP of marketing, my entire existence was built on perception. I sold narratives, crafted images, and spun desire out of thin air. My value was measured in engagement metrics, brand loyalty, and market penetration. I didn't create things, I created the idea of things. My life was a performance, a constant pitch, and I was very, very good at it. Our life together became my ultimate campaign. I was the brand manager of Fiora and Knox. I curated our experiences for public consumption. A quiet weekend hike wasn't just a hike. It was a multi-post Instagram story, complete with geotags, cinematic boomerangs of crunching leaves, and carefully worded captions about unplugging and finding our center. A simple, delicious dinner Knox cooked became a rustic culinary journey, photographed from 5 different angles under the perfect lighting I'd installed in the kitchen for this exact purpose. He hated it, not with loud arguments, but with a quiet, deep-seated discomfort that settled in his shoulders. He would watch me arrange his calloused, varnish-stained hands around a coffee mug for the perfect, candid shot, and a look of profound weariness would cross his face. Fiora, he'd say, his voice gentle but firm, a tone I always misinterpreted as quaintly stubborn, we're just having coffee. Can't we just have coffee? Without an audience. I dismissed it as him being old-fashioned, a charming Luddite who just didn't get it. I saw his resistance not as a boundary, but as a flaw in his personal brand that I, the expert, needed to manage. It's just fun, Knox, I'd say, framing his reluctance as a cute quirk in my online narrative. People love seeing this stuff, they love us. The us I was selling was a fiction, and deep down, he knew it. The invisible red line, the one I tap danced over for 3 years, was his absolute devotion to authenticity. He believed in the integrity of things, of wood, of people, of moments. He couldn't stand pretense. For him, my constant need to package and present our life wasn't just an annoying habit, it was a fundamental betrayal of reality. It was a lie. He tried to tell me in his quiet, non-confrontational way. He'd say things like, I feel like I'm dating your phone sometimes. Or do your followers really need to know we bought a new lamp? Or the one that should have been a 5-alarm fire, sometimes I feel like a prop in your life, Fiora. I'd laugh it off, pat his cheek, and tell him he was cute. I never heard the desperation in his voice. I never saw the man drowning in the sea of my curated content. I was too busy listening for the notification chime, the sweet, addictive validation from an audience that didn't matter, while ignoring the one person who did. The actual breakup wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet, clinical amputation. It happened on a Tuesday. We were at a dinner party with 2 other couples, friends of mine from the industry. The conversation, as it always did, turned to work, to wins, to the relentless climb. I was on my 2nd glass of wine, holding court, telling a story about a difficult client we'd just landed. To make the story funnier, more dramatic, I used Knox as a punchline. So the client is waffling, a total nightmare, I said, my voice projecting across the table. And I'm thinking this requires a delicate touch, you know? Not like Knox's approach to a stubborn piece of furniture, which is basically just to hit it with a bigger hammer. The table laughed. It was a cheap, easy laugh. I glanced at Knox, expecting him to play along, to give a self-deprecating smile. He didn't. He just looked at his plate, his fork resting by a piece of chicken he hadn't touched. The light in his eyes, the one that usually held a quiet amusement, was gone. It was just a flat, matte emptiness. I felt a flicker of unease, but ignored it, plowing ahead with my story. I had an audience to entertain. When we got home, the silence in the car was heavy. I was still buzzing from the social performance, but the moment the apartment door clicked shut behind us, the atmosphere changed. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. Knox wasn't built for that. He just stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, and looked at me, really looked at me. I'm tired, Fiora, he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. It was scarier than any shout. Tired? It was a long week, I get it. No, he interrupted, a rare thing for him. I'm tired of being a punchline. I'm tired of being a character in the story you're constantly telling everyone. Tonight, you made my work, the one thing that is truly mine, into a joke to score points with people you don't even like. My defense mechanisms kicked in immediately, a fortress of indignation. Oh, come on, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. It's called telling a good story. No, he said again, shaking his head slowly. A good story is true. What you do is advertising. And I don't want to be your product anymore. That's when he delivered the final, devastating diagnosis. I don't feel like your partner, Fiora. I feel like your competitor. And I'm exhausted from trying to keep up. My cognitive arrogance, the part of me that defines my entire professional identity, couldn't process it. It was like a computer trying to divide by zero. Him leaving me, it was a narrative violation, a bug in the system. I saw his calm departure not as a consequence of my actions, but as a condescending, arrogant judgment of my entire being. He was abandoning the project, and that, more than any heartbreak, was an insult my ego simply could not endure. It was that profound sense of professional failure that planted the seed for the email. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had questioned my value, and I would make him pay for that. The email was sent on a Thursday. For the rest of that day and all of Friday, I lived on a high of righteous fury, checking my inbox every 5 minutes, anticipating his reply. Would it be angry, pleading? I didn't care as long as it was a reaction. Any reaction would be a victory, proof that I had gotten under his skin. But there was nothing. Just a vast, echoing digital silence. By Saturday afternoon, the high had worn off, replaced by annoying, anxious dread. The silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It felt like a deliberate strategy. It felt like power. My grand gesture had landed in a void. The first tremor of the collapse came in the form of a phone call from Jessica. I answered eagerly, expecting her to have the inside scoop, maybe a second-hand report of Knox's devastation. Hey, you'll never guess what, I started, ready to launch into a triumphant, fabricated tale about my date with Oliver. Fiora, what did you do? Jessica's voice wasn't warm or conspiratorial, it was tight, strained. The voice you use on a conference call when the numbers are bad. What do you mean? I just sent him a little update, letting him know I'm doing great. There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. He forwarded it, Fiora. My blood went cold, he what? To who? To me, to Ryan and Chloe, to maybe a couple of others I don't know, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. There was no angry commentary, no defense. He just sent the email. My mind raced, trying to process the strategic implications. He was trying to poison the well, turn our friends against me. That son of a bitch, I seethed. He's trying to make me look like the bad guy. No, Jessica said, and her voice was so full of pity it felt like a slap. He attached a note, one sentence. I held my breath. What did it say? Just wanted you all to know what's going on, Jessica recited, her tone flat like she was reading from a legal document. I'm going to need some space for a while. Wish you all the best, Knox. The air left my lungs. It was a move of such devastating simplicity that my marketing-addled brain could barely comprehend it. It wasn't an attack, it was a tactical retreat. He wasn't fighting me on my battlefield of spin and narrative. He was simply showing them the unedited footage of my character, trusting them to draw their own conclusions. He presented my words, my carefully crafted poison darts, as Exhibit A. This was the system collapse. He didn't excommunicate me from our social circle. He just quietly resigned from it, and in doing so, highlighted me as the reason for his departure. He made me the problem without ever calling me one. The friends caught in the crossfire weren't taking sides. They were just backing away from the blast zone. Their silence wasn't an accusation. It was a quiet, awkward, collective distancing from the crazy woman with the digital bomb. He hadn't destroyed my support system. He had simply shown them who I was and let them quietly walk away. The days that followed were a masterclass in social isolation. The silence from my phone became a deafening roar. In my numb, detached state, I decided to do something productive, something tangible. I decided to finally pack up the last of Knox's things. It wasn't about closure, it was about reclaiming territory, erasing his presence from my space. Most of it was easy. A few sweaters he'd left behind, a worn-out pair of boots, his favorite coffee mug. I packed them into a cardboard box with cold efficiency. The last bastion of his existence was the garage. He used half of it as a makeshift workshop, and it still smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. It was the one room in the apartment that I had never tried to style or stage for a photo. It was authentically his. Under his sturdy workbench, tucked behind a stack of lumber, was a wooden box. It was a beautiful thing made of walnut with intricate dovetailed joints at the corners. It was unfinished, the wood still pale and raw, waiting for its final sanding and oiling. I recognized his handiwork instantly. It was a jewelry box, the kind of project he poured his soul into. My first thought was a bitter one. He was probably making it for someone else. The thought fueled my anger, a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in my chest. I pried the lid open, expecting to find it empty. It wasn't. Inside, there was no velvet lining, no jewelry, just a single piece of paper, a printout from a travel website. It was a reservation confirmation for a two-night stay at a place called the Weaver's Cabin, a secluded little rental nestled in the mountains, surrounded by old-growth forest. The reservation was for the weekend of our 4th anniversary, which would have been next month. I stared at the paper, my brain refusing to connect the dots. I had mentioned that place once, maybe 8 months ago, after seeing a picture of it online. I'd said something casual, something like, "Wow, can you imagine just disappearing there for a weekend?" No phones, no emails, just trees. It was a fleeting throwaway comment, a piece of content I'd probably forgotten minutes after I'd said it. He hadn't forgotten. He had heard that small, quiet wish, filed it away, and was building this entire, secret, beautiful plan around it. He was even making me a box, a physical object to hold the memory. This quiet, tangible proof of his love, of his attention, of a future he was actively building for us, was sitting here in the dust. It was real, and I had traded it for a lie. The contrast between this unfinished box, this silent, heartfelt promise, and my loud, vicious, empty email was a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs and the self-delusion from my head. The numbness that had been my shield for 2 weeks shattered, and for the first time, the full crushing weight of what I had done, what I had lost, came crashing down on me. I didn't just lose a boyfriend, I had destroyed something true, so now I sit on the floor of my silent, sterile apartment. The coroner's work is done. The box sits in front of me, its unfinished wood a constant, tactile reproach. The numbness has returned, but it's different now. It's not a shield, it's a symptom of the rot. It's laced with a sharp, metallic taste of self-loathing. My mind has become a courtroom where I am the prosecutor, the defense, and the defendant all at once. The self-contradiction is a relentless, exhausting cycle. One minute the prosecutor is in charge, pacing furiously. He was too rigid, I'll mutter to the empty room, too principled. He never understood the world I live in, the pressure. He didn't fight for us, he just walked away. He pushed me to it with his quiet judgment and his impossible standards. A flicker of the old, righteous anger will flare up, a comforting warmth in the cold. Then inevitably the defense collapses. My gaze will fall on the walnut box. The prosecutor slumps into his chair, defeated. No, the whisper comes, raw and broken, it was me. I'm a monster. I took a good, quiet, honest man and tried to turn him into a marketing campaign. I valued the appearance of love over the reality of it. I broke the most authentic thing in my life because my ego got a paper cut. I pick up my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. I've written 100 different apology texts, each one a desperate, rambling plea. I never send them, what's the point? It would just be another performance. Then I switch to Instagram, a masochistic pilgrimage to his profile, it's private now, another door quietly closed. This is the loop, the endless self-contradiction. The autopsy report is finished, but I keep reopening the files, staring at the cause of death. One moment I'm blaming the victim, the next I'm confessing to the murder. The final conclusion is always the same, written in cold, clinical print: death by arrogance, homicide of the heart, and the killer was me.